about the webinar. Thanks for taking the time to join us today for a best practices webinar focusing on independent third-party verification of placement. I'm going to go ahead and pop in for the intro so you can actually see me here. So there I am. And we're sitting here in our glass conference room here in Arlington, Virginia. Just coming out of our August commission meeting. So a lot of activity ongoing here in Arlington. And one of the, I think, more critical topics that we spent a lot of time talking about here over the last quarter at ACCSC is focusing on the independent third-party verification of placement. And so I wanted to take some time to share with you some information about this important change to accreditation and make sure that the members have some more comfortability about the direction we're going with this new requirement as part of the accreditation process. So I'm going to pop off here, and I'll pop back on when we're going to do some Q&A. But we have a really robust agenda today, and I thought we would go ahead and get started. So to start us off, just share some foundational thoughts with the group about independent third party, and then spend a little bit of time talking about the guidelines, which I think really provide a good framework for institutions that are undergoing the third-party review. We'll talk about the process, share with you some data that we've gathered to date as part of the results, and then really dig into the best practices to give you some helpful hints that high-performing institutions have developed and deployed in this area, and then have some time for some Q&A as well. In the system, you'll see there are a couple of documents that are available for you. There is an independent third-party FAQ, as well as the tests that are required to determine independency for a third party. And there's also a lot of resources online as well, and I will point to those as we continue to go forward in today's conversation. So to get us started on this topic, I want to share with you some foundational thoughts. One being how we are looking at this as an accrediting commission. And truly the belief at the staff and at the commission level that meaningful things are happening every single day at ACCSC accredited institutions. And quite frankly, I can say that with confidence because in the past 2 years, we've done upwards of 500 on-site evaluations. And that's a lot of activity, and pretty much every single day we have an on-site evaluation team in one of our institutions showing that every single day students are engaged in classroom activities, they're going on externships, they're sitting and passing licensure examinations, and they're graduating with the skills that they need to gain entry into a particular vocational field. We think this is something our schools do extraordinarily well. In fact, so much that the 3-year average placement rate reported by ACCSC accredited institutions was 76% from 2012 to 2014. And really, I think that underscores that ACCSC accredited institutions are contributing in a meaningful fashion to workforce development in this country. And so I think that's something that we feel good about. And really the foundation for this verification process, which is we believe that ACCSC accredited institutions are in fact doing good things every day and serving their students in the highest possible fashion. This process of the independent third-party verification is really an effort by ACCSC to help to build and in fact reestablish some confidence in our accredited member schools, in the enterprise of accreditation, and establish confidence for members of Congress, for lawmakers, for state regulators, and for more importantly, for the students that choose to attend one of our 700 accredited institutions located across the country. And ACCSC has always required schools to maintain verifiable records of initial employment, and this new independent audit is building some confidence around that. We think in concert with unannounced visits, in concert with regular student achievement reporting, that this is helping to change the conversation to one of skepticism to one, in fact, of confidence. And we think that this third-party audit is probably one of the more powerful tools that we have available to us. But having said that, I think the Commission recognizes and understands that graduate employment at a high rate is a significant challenge. Our schools work very hard to support students. They have, I think, very dynamic and robust student services and career services in place. I think there is a high level of education being delivered at ACCSE accredited institutions, but motivating that student to completion, helping them to understand the importance of being on time, in uniform every day through a 9 to 12 month program, and helping them to understand the importance of remaining engaged with the school after graduation day and working to get that job is a difficult thing to do. And if we look a little bit at the data, what the data tells us is that from 51 on-site evaluations that were conducted as part of the accreditation process, that in fact there were 155 total team findings, which averages to about 155 total findings in 51 reports, or another way of saying around 3 team findings per visit, which I think is a pretty good number. But what the data is showing us is that overall, the most common finding during the on-site evaluation process centers around student achievement. And what I can share with you from this chart is most of these team findings focus around graduate employment as opposed to graduation rates. And so it is a significant challenge. I mean, admissions and advertising, kind of pure compliance-related areas, we've seen an ongoing challenge with, and program advisor committees as well. But overall, at our February 2015 meeting, you can see the highest or most commonly cited area by teams focused around student achievement. A pattern that, if you jump back, student achievement. And then if we look at commission actions as a whole over the period of 1 year, you can see in fiscal year 2014, the most common commission level action with respect to interim reporting focuses on outcomes. More specifically, focuses on graduate employment rates. You can see that upwards of 55 institutions were on formal outcomes reporting, around 10 schools on heightened monitoring, which really gives the commission an opportunity to take a look at a school's annual report. And then from my vantage point over the last year, we have seen more of an uptick on schools that have been placed on a warning or a probation purely because of student achievement rates. And so the commission pays great attention to graduation rates and graduate employment rates, and this chart really underscores that it remains an ongoing challenge for institutions. One of the things I wanted to share as well is what we're trying to do with accreditation is to change this dialogue and from skepticism to confidence. And what is clear to us is that the expectations of accreditors are changing significantly. I think accreditation has been subject to increased scrutiny and criticism by a lot of policymakers, and they have good questions about whether or not accreditation is fulfilling its promise. And we look at this twofold, using accreditation to ensure the quality of education provided by 700 accredited institutions, and then ensuring the continued integrity of Title IV as we work with the Department of Education and the state regulatory community through the triad. There has been a tremendous amount of activity here. There was a Senate hearing that, quite frankly, didn't go well for accreditation, and I think a high level of skepticism around accreditation. There have been a myriad of policy papers from the National Advisory Committee on Institutional Quality and Integrity, which advises the Secretary of Education, all in advance of the Higher Education Act reauthorization. And quite frankly, all of these different entities are looking for more. They're looking for more accountability, and they're looking for more transparency. And I would expect the landscape of accreditation to change as Congress engages with reauthorization activities in a very robust fashion. And so we're trying to stay ahead of this as we can, often up on the Hill, often working with members of Congress, working with our partners at the state level, and talking about the things that accreditation is trying to do to help instill that confidence. And again, this is timely because I do believe that third-party verification is one of those key components to an effective strategy as we seek to change that conversation. And so you can see accreditation is evolving, and we think is improving. I mean, there is such an increase in federalization of accreditation. You know, we're really trying to take the time to show that accreditation is both reliable and dependable without any increased involvement by the federal government. And so you can see upwards of 4 years ago in 2011, we started a random sampling process where each and every year the Commission selected 10% of the schools through the annual report process and subjected their reported rates of student achievements to a independent verification process. And I'll talk a little bit more about that data as we go forward. And then in 2014, given the success of that random sampling, the Commission adopted its independent verification process as part of the initial or renewal of accreditation process. And again, hoping to bolster some confidence and again reinforce the long-standing requirement that institutions maintain verifiable records of initial employment. All of this, we think, is helping to change the dialogue. We're able to have conversations with policymakers and legislators and state regulators talking about that these reported rates of student achievement are unassailable, that they have been subjected to independent audits, that they are real numbers, and that they demonstrate the value that is being added by ACCSE accredited institution that is being added to workforce development in this country. And so we feel good about this to date. I'll share with you some of the results. But it's been, I think, a few years in the works, something that the Commission is very thoughtful with and as they've gone through this process. And we've learned quite a bit, and so we wanted to take some time today to share with you some of those learnings as well. So before we start into the independent verification process, I want to do a quick recap for you on what I think is one of the more important foundational items for an institution, and that's documentation. And if you've been involved with accreditation on any level, you understand that documentation is one of the key success strategies for schools. Does the school have accessible documentation to demonstrate that it's following its policies and procedures in a consistent fashion? And really, that's what accreditation does. It looks to determine that those policies have been established, are in compliance with standards, and are being deployed consistently as to have a positive impact on the student education experience. And so that's where we start, right? We start at the policy and procedural level, and the requirement that a school adheres to policies regarding employment classifications. And so we're talking about the reasonability of employment of graduates, sustainability of employment, and the relatedness. And so as a resource, again, I would encourage you, if you have not done so recently, to look at ACCSE's Guidelines for Employment Classification, which really gives you a blueprint for expectations. If you want to have a solid understanding of what the Commission is looking for with respect to employment records, it is there under Appendix 7 of the standards. Now, this presentation will be hyperlinked online. It has hyperlinks in the document itself, and so you'll be able to go into this presentation, click directly on the guidelines, and those guidelines will launch for you. So one of the things I would do is to make sure that you familiarize yourself with the guidelines. If you do not have guidelines currently around employment classifications, now is the time to really start to do that. Work to update your policies regarding how you maintain verifiable records of initial employment. And if you have started to work with a third party, you should have a signed contract. Keep in mind, this is not a process that we require institutions to go through on a yearly basis. This is once every 5 years as part of the accreditation cycle. And so if you're not scheduled to begin that process for another 24 to 36 months, you certainly have some ramp-up time. But you want to make sure that you're making a good faith effort to go down this path. so that you don't find yourself scrambling trying to find a third party to engage in this activity for the institution. So take a look at your policies, take a look at your procedures, review those guidelines, and make sure there is consistent alignment with those documents. Let's talk about the record itself really quickly. Again, we have always, ACC has always required verifiable records of initial employment. Verifiable means that we have an opportunity as your accreditor to make contact with the students or employer in an attempt to verify the information maintained by the institution. And so some key things, and this seems very basic, but I will tell you it is surprising to me to see how often a school's records are incomplete. And not to steal my own thunder, as I'll get to this later, but sloppy record keeping is a top 3 contributor to a third party's inability to verify employment. And probably the one area that is the most readily fixable for an institution. And so minimum graduate name and contact information, phone and email, that date of initial employment, the place of employment, employer address and phone number, employer contact person and supervisor. And then you can see here descriptive job titles and duties a bit popped out from our bulleted list. And that's with reason, because this is probably the one area of the records that is the most critical, which is, can the commission make a determination based upon the job title and the duties that this is job training related, right? If the student graduated from a nursing program and the job record title says nurse, well, you know, it's pretty clear. But if that job title is not specific enough to industry, if it says clerk or associate or assistant, those job duties become increasingly important. What is that person doing on the job that is specifically related to the education they received at the institution? I have seen more and more institutions provide copies of job announcements and copies of job duties, position announcements that are stapled to or kept in the file along with that verifiable record. It must be clear to anyone who is looking at it that this is related to the education provided by the institution. So take a look at the record to ensure the record includes all the areas as required. And so again, another helpful hint that we would offer is the first time that this record is looked at should not be by the independent third party. Institutions should be doing their own internal assessment of, do we have verifiable records of initial employment that line up with the graduation and employment charts required by ACCSC. In fact, as I have often shared with institutions, schools should be engaging in random, unannounced, internal audits of their own files. Both on the admission side, is documentation available to demonstrate that all students who started in a program met the school's admissions requirements? Are enrollment agreements complete? Are there records of high school diploma and GEDs? Is there a copy of the admissions test and all the other criteria that you might have? Is that on record in file for every single student that you enrolled? And conversely, does every single graduate file maintain a verifiable record of initial employment that aligns with the data that you submit to your accrediting commission? So the employment classification is appropriate and reasonable based upon the educational objectives of the program. You know, is it clear that the placement seems sensible based upon the objectives of the program? And again, if I am reading your catalog and I am reading your program objectives, I have a solid understanding of the type of employment that I would be eligible for and qualified to do when I graduate. And do the bulk of those students who graduate work in those fields, right? If a third party is unable to verify that placement, do you still maintain a record that demonstrates why you listed them as graduate as employed? You know, if they tried 6 emails and they tried 6 phone calls to verify employment, and they couldn't verify it, I mean, that is what it is. Sometimes it could be the staleness or the age of the record, but you still maintain something on file that says, well, we categorize them as employed in the field for the following reasons, and here is that record. Employed in field is what we're going for. This is the goal, right? And so we apply our guidelines for employment classification. Is the employment for a reasonable period of time, right? You do not see the standards require a 30-day or 45-day or 60-day employment. We say reasonable, and for good reason. I think the diversity of programs offered by our institutions, you know, it makes it difficult to have a one-set rule for full-time employment, part-time employment. Those students that are working on a contract basis, those students that are paid on a 1099, those students that are freelancing, those students who use those skills to get a job with the intention of working a handful of hours per week. What the Commission is looking for is that it is for a reasonable period of time. And what that means is it cannot be a single day of employment where you have a local health fair over a weekend and must be ongoing. As I've shared before, it must be based on the program objective. And again, this is, in fact, sustainable employment. And so the questions to ask, some action items. Do you have a policy regarding how you define a reasonable period of time, right? If the Commission is looking at your records and we see that, yes, you have an 86% employment rate, but 80% of those records show 2 and 3 days of employment before a student is terminated, I mean, I think that raises some real issues. Now, this sounds like an interesting question to ask, but when is the school capturing the information? Is it really on the first day that the student works? So how to determine reasonability of a period of time if the only time a school verifies employment is on day 1? Institutions should think about an additional follow-up after a period of time, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. And really, probably the biggest challenge for institutions in any accreditation process is consistency. You know, many of our institutions have really robust policies in admissions, with respect to student services, with respect to student academic progress, with career services. We have advising, we have counseling policies and procedures. You know, the accreditation team comes to the school, they're looking at the policies and procedures, but then they're pulling files. And they're looking for the consistent application of these policies. And I think that same expectation can be applied on the output side of what a school is provided in terms of services. When we are talking about regular employment, right? This is, I am going to work for an established company that has office hours. Is it directly related to the program from which the individual graduated? And again, this underscores the importance of the clarity and the precision in the record keeping. And sometimes, quite frankly, it's clear that it's unrelated, right? If I graduate from an HVAC program and I'm working at McDonald's or I'm working at Tower Records, how is that related? None of the information maintained by the school shows any relatedness between that record and what the student is actually doing. And so that is a burden that the institution bears, is to make sure it is, in fact, directly related. It aligns with the majority of educational and training objectives. And here's a key thing. It is a paid position, right? They must be generating income from this position. And so again, the accreditation expectation is that the documentation matches up to that educational program objective. So you have a verifiable record of initial employment, and I've seen lately more institutions include a copy of that job description or a position announcement with that record because it has a much more expansive information about how that graduate is qualified in that, for that position. When we talk about self-employment, the first thing that I'll say is that these self-employment records are proven to be the most difficult to verify. Student transient populations, changing of phone numbers, changing of addresses. And so it does require, I think, some particular heightened attention from an institution. But the school is required to secure documentation from the self-employed graduates. That includes, at a minimum, a statement signed by the graduate stating their contact information, that they're working in the field, and this is aligned with what they wanted to do on a vocational basis based upon those program objectives. An attestation that they're earning money from their employment in the field. And if they are required to have a license, an attestation that they have secured that license. And so the fundamental questions a school should be asking themselves with respect to documentation is, does it have that form or statement that includes all of the elements required on the guidelines for employment classification? And so, we're seeing a great amount of variety in records being maintained by institutions, particularly around self-employment. And so this is one way of saying you can't simply print up a Facebook page posting where a student says, I got a job, I start tomorrow. We're looking for a bit more with respect to what consists of a verifiable record. So do you have the form? If they're required to have a license, is the license active and current? Have they taken the exam but not yet received a result? So pay particular attention to self-employment. It is something that we've seen in terms of trending being proven to be the most difficult verifications to make through the third-party process. And a third and final category under the guidelines deals under career advancement. And this is really when it appears that the student was hired before they graduated from the program, and sometimes before they even started the program. So how is this vocation related? And so really the two fundamental things is that written documentation demonstrate they were at least able to maintain that employment position, or that they were eligible for advancement based upon the training that they received. And so a lot of times we see this in fields like EMT, where I am currently a volunteer EMT, and I'm now going to school to advance in my career, to become certified, to become a professional EMT, to become a team lead, whatever advancement might be afforded to me if I continue my education. But the burden is that you have to show that you didn't put someone in a program where they were already working without any benefit to that student. Okay, so that's a little bit more on the guidelines, and now we want to go ahead and dive directly into the process itself. So as a resource, keep in mind there is a dedicated section of our website that has a lot of resources for institutions. That's under the resources page. And again, we will be providing this presentation and a recording of the webinar online, and so you'll be able to link directly to that page. But it has an FAQ, it has the tests for the independent auditor, it has a lot of information on this process, and so I'd encourage you to take advantage of that. So a little bit about selecting the third party. The third party is not going to go through any type of approval process with the commission. In fact, to date, there have been 21 different third parties that have successfully submitted an independent audit. Right? And what that independent auditor is required to do is to provide an attestation. That includes 7 items. They cannot be affiliated with the school, so they cannot have any ownership stake in the institution. And this is an important one. Cannot provide any other service to the school. So if you're a servicer, that provides HR consulting, that provides payroll, that provides any other service, you are ineligible for doing the independent audit. This must be the only service that a third party is providing, with one exception, and that is certified public accountants are eligible to engage in the independent audit. And to date, of the 21 different third parties, 9 different CPAs have submitted results. If I am being truly and fully forthright with you today, I would tell you that some of the challenges that we've seen with respect to results seem to be more common from the CPAs. And I can't say exactly why that is, other than to say perhaps they are not equipped or have been set up to engage in this type of activity, which is really a bit different from a financial statement audit. And some of the standalone third-party auditors, this is all that they do, and they have really robust systems in place and have proven to be a bit more effective. So the recommendation that I have, I think that I would do your due diligence when you're seeking out a third party. Make sure you get some referrals. Work within your state association groups or with your brethren in the career college sector, and share experiences. See what they have to offer with respect to any feedback they have working with a particular third party. And then the auditor is verifying the employment data independent from the school, which means that you are providing the graduation employment chart and the backup documents to that chart to the independent third party, and they are engaging in their audit completely separate from any involvement from the institution. The auditor must select a minimum of a 50% sample, and what that means is 50% of every graduation and employment chart that you submit as part of your annual report. So if you have a welding program and you have a full-time and a part-time program, because of the impact of satisfactory academic progress, we know that you would have a separate G&E chart. Each one of those charts, both the part-time welding and full-time welding program, would be required to be subject to a 50% random sampling. The auditor can secure written or verbal verification from either the graduate or the employer. And so when working with a third party, you will be able to negotiate the terms of engagement. How many emails will they be sending to the graduate and the employer? How many phone calls will they be sending to the graduate or employer? How often will they be doing this? Is it once a day? Is it twice a week? And make sure you have an understanding of the protocols and how they will be deployed when the third party is engaging in this third party audit. The point being is that the third party is not just looking at the documentation. They are actually reaching out into the field to do the verification. The auditor will provide a summary of the results, which I'll talk about more in a minute, as well as a description of how they came up with that 50% methodology. Did they do every other month? Did they do every even month? How did they determine what would make up that 50% sample? Again, there's some flexibility there. You cannot be selective as to pick the highest performing cohorts. It truly should be more of a random sampling, and we want to understand how the third party came up with that sample. And then we put great faith into these audits, and so the auditor must sign a certification that attests to the accuracy and the independence of their work, right? And we will keep that at face value. And so as we all understand, ethics is incredibly important as part of the accreditation process. We take violations of any ethics to be an extreme a violation, and so, take this with the seriousness that it deserves. Due process is fundamental to accreditation, and I say that because if you find that you had an independent audit which results did not go as well as you would have liked, there is process, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So the school will engage the third party. If you are getting ready to go through the process, meaning you went to the July accreditation workshop, or you're going to the September accreditation workshop, or you're going to a workshop in the first part of 2016, the third party will be verifying the G&E charts included in the 2015 annual report. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, about the timing of that, but this is the most up-to-date information on record. Although it's not due until October, it relies upon July 2015 report dates, and so schools have the opportunity now to fill out those charts and to start to do that verification process. We talked about the 50% sample, program by program, every program offered, full-time and part-time. And again, once the sample has been selected, it cannot be altered. So here's the key on the format. Here's what we're looking for with respect to the results of the independent audit. A, the total number of students or graduates in the sample, and B, the number of students and percentage in each of the 4 categories below. Category 1 is what we're shooting for. We're shooting for verified as correct. And what that simply means is that the record maintained by the school, which shows that the graduate is working in the field for which training is provided, that is making money, that is sustainable and ongoing employment, is correct. The job title, the place of employment, the date of initial employment, that record is correct. And that is what we're going for, and that is what we're shooting for. Not verified simply means that despite all efforts, we made 6 phone calls, we made 6 emails, we could not verify the employment. The third party could not reach the graduate, could not reach the employer, and could not verify the employment. That's different than verified as not correct, which is a red flag, which is there is no record that graduate ever worked there. It is an unpaid position, or there are other significant discrepancies to the record. And that can be a challenge if there is a pattern of unverifiable records of initial employment, or incorrect or false records. And the commission, again, has a process, which we'll talk about the next steps when they find a high number of records are unreliable. And then verified but different could in fact be a positive outcome. Yes, we verified the student was working as a welder, but the date of initial employment was wrong. The title was incorrect. Something about the record itself was incorrect, although the third party may in fact verify that yes, we did hire them, yes, we are paying them, yes, it is ongoing, and yes, it is in the field. And so that is really more of a record-keeping issue. So once the third-party process is complete, those results will be submitted to ACCSC directly at the same time the school submits a self-evaluation report. The on-site evaluation team will be coming to the school as part of the renewal or initial accreditation process. They will have a copy of the results. They will be looking at the graduation employment charts. They'll be looking at patterns to see, is there a high rate of verifiability? Are there any patterns of records that were incorrect? And it may result in a request for additional information. For example, if the team finds that 25% of the records were unverifiable, meaning we simply could not contact anyone, the team may request additional information. It would likely not be a team finding of noncompliance, as opposed to, look, there's a pattern here of unverifiable records, we need more information. If it is found that 60% of the records are unreliable and incorrect, I mean, I think there's a pretty good chance that's going to be a team finding. Now, it's important to underscore that the team is not making the decision about compliance. They are simply reporting on this to the commission. Here is what the report results yielded. Here is what the team saw when on-site, on grounds in the institution. Because it is included in the report, the school obviously has the opportunity to provide a response. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we transition into our best practices. Now, before I jump into the results, we have a few questions, and so I want to go ahead and take a moment to answer the questions as best that I can. If I don't get to your question, I'll make sure that I have a chance to follow up with you offline. So we just have a handful here. One of the questions is, with regard to self-employment, would it be more ethical to get the attestation that self-employment is aligned with career plans on the front end of enrollment? I think that's a good question. You know, I don't know about ethics, but I would always encourage an institution to have complete transparency. And, you know, the more information that I can put into the arms of a student and the more informed a student is, to say that, well, you know, likely a high proportion of our students are self-employed upon graduation, the better off that student is going to be. It will help, you know, it will help any disappointment. It will minimize any surprises. So, you know, full transparency during the enrollment process, I think, is something worth doing. So let's see. A lot of graduates go to work for big companies, which have recruiting departments that secure new hires from which we obtain graduation, that graduates are attending a new hire orientation. Those companies' policies usually require written authorization to release such information. How do you suggest a third party deals with that? And that comes from Chuck. Chuck, thanks for the question. So you raise a good point, something that we'll get to in our best practices, but since you've asked, what we would encourage a school to do is at the time of graduation to have the student sign a release, which allows any employer to release that employment data to the school or to an independent verifier. We are also hearing that some employers are balking at signed release forms that are over a year old. And so we wouldn't encourage you to have those release forms signed at orientation, but to build them in as part of your exit strategies, right? So you have an exit interview before they graduate. You're talking about student loan paying back their student loans. Hopefully you're providing them a copy of the ACCSC graduation letter, which has a lot of good information in it. And you're having them sign a release form saying, look, this is to your benefit. We are responsible to determine that you're able to get a job based upon the training you received here. And so this form allows us to do that. A question from Jane. Jane's question is, will ACCSC make a standard for the number of days of actual employment that would be acceptable? That's a great question, Jane. I can tell you that as of today, the answer is no. But, you know, there may come a time where there are more questions on what is sustainable. I understand that other accrediting bodies have established 30 and 45 days as the benchmarks for number of days in employment. Our point is that it's ongoing and sustainable at this point, and there is nothing on the Commission's immediate radar to revisit that. So thanks for the question, Jane. Okay, for students who are already in an established unionized skills trade field, like an electrician, but looking for an additional skill set such as HVAC or welding, can they be used as place graduates if they're using the HVAC welding skills but considered a union journeyman for the past 20 years? So a little bit into the weeds on that. I think it's a good question, and I think that the challenge is, and that comes from Jason, how can you demonstrate that, yes, I've always been an electrician, but now I have a new set of skills that is helping me to advance or maintain my employment in the field? That is the real challenge. A question on how often is third-party verification required? It's required as part of your renewal of accreditation cycle, which is typically 5 years. If you were granted a 3-year grant, then it would be once every 3 years. But typically, most of our schools have a 5-year a grant, and when you are signed to begin the renewal process, you will begin this third-party verification process. Having said that, you may be selected for a random sampling by ACCSC, meaning we will do the verification, but we will do it requesting the records from the school. Okay, so I'm going to jump back into the presentation. I promise if I haven't answered your question yet, we will get back to it. There's a lot of good questions queuing up here. But let me go ahead and jump back into the presentation. And I want to share with you some of the independent verification results to date. And the first thing we're going to look at is the 4 years that ACCSC has done their own independent verification. So around 303 schools have been randomly selected for independent verification over the last 4 years. An institution would have received a letter from us saying, congratulations, you have been selected for independent verification, directing you to submit your graduation and employment charts along with your backup documentation. And over the last 4 years, we have looked at almost 13,000 records, and 73% of those records were verified as correct, with 21% of those records being unable to verify, and 4.4% of those records were verified as not correct. And that's a bit of an uptick as you compare it to the data that has been gathered by the institutions working with their own third parties. So as a baseline for 4 years, we're seeing right around a 73% verification rate. If you look at the trending data from year to year, and we're going from left to right, 2011 to 2014, there's some good trends here. So on the verified side, more records are being verified. We had a little bit of a downtick from 2013 to 2014, but in fact, it is still up over 2011 and 2012. The number of records that were unable to be verified is downward turning, which again is a positive trend, where year to year, although again a bit of an uptick in 2013, we're seeing a downward trend, which is a good thing for unable to verify, and relatively flat with respect to the records that weren't correct. If we take a look at the results from the accreditation cycle, you can see that we've had 131 different schools go through this process as part of the renewal or initial accreditation cycle. As I share with you, we had 21 different third parties submit an audit on behalf of a school going through the process. And we've looked at about 10,000 records over the last 2 years. Now, 99% of the schools, or 130 of 131, have met the requirement that they do a 50% sample. And so what that says to me is that the instructions are clear, right? And so make sure you understand the instructions. Go to the resources page of accsc.org, look at the employment verification page. There are a lot of resources there for you. Make sure that you and your third party understand the requirement. And this tells me that by and large, only one school missed the mark with respect to their audit. 10% or 13 schools went ahead and did a 100% audit of their employment records. I will share with you that most of these schools are small institutions, with 13 graduates from a program, and the school went ahead and did 100% sampling as opposed to trying to verify 6 records. And so if we look at this information as it's gone year to year, again, the overall verified is correct, pretty consistent with what the commission found through its random sampling, right around 75%. The median being about 79%. The not verified or unverifiable at 17%. Again, that's about a 6% downturn from ACCSC's independent audits. And the verified but different around 5%, again, which is a little bit lower than ACCSC found in its own independent audit. One of the things that jumps off the page to me, though, as we put this chart together, is a little bit of a trend in the wrong way. And what you can see is that we've had a decrease from 84% to 78% to 63% based upon the 3 cohorts of March, July, and September 2014. At the same time, the not verified rate also increased, the verified but different increased, and the verified and incorrect increased. So for whatever reason, the institutions that are in the September 2014 cohort did not perform as well as the schools in the January 2014 cohort by a pretty significant amount. We're talking 13 percentage points under the verifiable and 4 percentage points under the unable to verify. And so, you know, we looked at this, and we looked at this in terms of school size, and we looked at this in terms of programs offered, and we looked at this in terms of geographic location, and there was no real pattern there, but there certainly is a trend. And if you look at it on a chart, you can see the downward trend with respect to verified as correct, the mean and the median, and you can see an upward trend with respect to the unable to verify. And that's not what we're going for here. And so something that I think schools really need to pay particular attention to. And so now really what I want to do is change gears and really get into the heart of this and really start to talk about what we can do with respect to best practices and what do high-performing institutions do. And so the best piece of advice that I have for any institution is that they have to be realistic. That we expect you as an institution to do a realistic assessment of program viability and overall of institutional performance. And you're going to have to forgive me here, but we're in an era of contraction and closure and consolidation, and it is starting to accelerate. Where on Friday of last week, I received a phone call at 3 o'clock p.m. telling me that a school will be closing at 5 o'clock p.m. that day and locking out over 60 students who came to school and found themselves facing a locked door and no plan, no teach-out agreement. And quite frankly, that's unacceptable. And the root cause of it, you know, I think there are a lot of things that we can look at, but unrealistic expectations by the owner, I think, is something that really came into play. And I would encourage you to take a hard and fast look at your services and programs. And you do not want to put the fate of your program and the fate of your business into the hands of a third party, whether that's your accrediting body or your state regulator or the Department of Education. You should be, as an institution, taking care of your students and making decisions that are for the best of your customers and your communities. And you have a lot of data. And you can see at what rate students are graduating and what rate graduates are passing licensure exams and what rates graduates are getting jobs. You have to respond to ACCSE every year. And you have to provide that data to us. And you have trending data. And you know when you have a downturn. And so I would encourage you to be decisive, right? And to look at the rates. And to look at how things are trending, and to look at the economic conditions and the rates of unemployment, and to look at competition in your local environment, and look at the potential for oversaturation of a particular program. If I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, how many surgical tech programs are there? Are there enough externship locations, right? Is there demand for this program? And many of our schools have legacy programs that they've offered for years and years and years. Are they still performing? And if they're not, why do you continue to enroll students into underperforming programs? Now, I will tell you that, as I said before, due process is crucial. And if you're an institution, you should have the expectation that if you have a downturn in performance, that you will be given an opportunity to take corrective action, to do a curriculum revision, to hire more career services, to have a special program advisory committee meeting to talk about employment trends, to talk about changes in expectations of graduates. And so I think accreditors certainly will provide you with that opportunity. Having said that, if you are on reporting for 18 months, for 24 months, and despite your best efforts, things are getting worse, you need to do something about it. And in this environment, the accreditor, the commission is getting more comfortable with taking those decisions and making those for you as an institution. And so I would really encourage you to look hard and fast at your objectives, at your programs, at your services, and be realistic. And if you see a downturn and you see that you are facing another small enrollment start that is going to further tax your business and have the potential to put you into harm's way, you need to reach out to us. You need to reach out to the state. You cannot leave students in harm's way. And so this goes down to program viability and program assessment. When you are working with your third party, which is why we're here, couple things to keep in mind. One is that the data that you should be getting should be useful to you as an institution. If you're looking to make informed decisions and get a solid understanding with how UL are performing, the data you should be getting should be useful. Do you understand the report? Does it make sense to you? It should be usable, right? If a graduate was categorized as unable to verify, why? Well, we sent 6 emails, we sent 6 phone numbers, we called 6 times, we could not reach anyone. If it was, more importantly, if it was found to be incorrect, the report should say specifically why. This record was found to be incorrect because the employer said they never worked there. So you should be getting specific feedback from the third party about your results. These results should be sortable, so you can sort through it by category. You can sort through it to get more information on trending. Was it a particular cohort of graduates that performed worse than others? And you are responsible to get this information to the third party, right? And that third party should understand from you as part of the contract the due dates and the deadlines, which will be in alignment with the due date of the SER. The number one suggestion that I have is to start early. That's number one, that's number two, it's number three, it's probably number 4 and 5 as well. Of the top 10 suggestions we have for you, you need to start early. You need to try to do real-time verification. What we are finding is that the older the data, the older the record, the more challenging it is to verify. And so you should not wait for 6 months to begin the verification process. If you know that you're going to have to submit your G&E chart in July, to submit in October, and you're going to have an SER due in January, you should not be waiting until November to do this verification, right? You should be starting as early as possible. You should think about batching verifications. One of the things that you should strive to do is to avoid annoying your employers, right? And annoying them where they're getting 17 verification calls a week. How can you batch that? Can you verify 17 records in one phone call or one email? And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. But batching verifications weekly or monthly or quarterly is, I think, a smart business practice. Now, this sounds pretty crazy, but you should verify the employment after the graduate started work. This is, believe it or not, the most common reason why a record is found to be invalid. And typically what happens is that the student comes to the school and says, I got a job, and it's at my externship location. When as soon as I finish my externship, they're going to hire me. I'm making $20 an hour. I'm working 30 hours a week. I start on September 1st, And so the Career Services goes in and says, Chris got a job at his externship location. He's making $20 a week. He starts August 1st. And then they never go back to revisit to see, did Chris show up and start work? And so the verification should be happening after they start work, right? 5 days, 7 days, 14 days. They started working and they've already received pay for that position. So the number one recommendation we have, start early in the verification process. Think about doing third party outside of what ACCSC requires. Again, our requirement is once every 5 years or part of your accreditation cycle. So if you have programs that have really stable, really reliable, consistent results, you still may want to do your own random sampling every year, maybe a 10% sampling. Keeping in mind that is going to take budget. And from what we understand, there is a range of fees that third parties are charging, depending on the level of services and the amount of outreach they do. And so it could be something like, for 6 phone calls or 6 emails, we will do it for $15 per record. If you want us to do 11 phone calls and 11 emails, our price point is $20 per record. And so you will be negotiating with the third party the terms of engagement. If things go well and it gets back to you and you have a 90% verification rate and a 0.5% invalid rate, maybe scale it down to keep your eye on it going forward. And if you're not doing that, at a minimum, I would continue to do your own unannounced internal audits of placement records. This is part of your own accountability checks. However, if you have a program that does not perform well, a high number of self-employments which prove to be very difficult to verify, you've had challenges with employment, you may think to do a 50% or greater verification every single year so that you have an opportunity to continue to work on this before your accreditor takes a good hard look at your results. A lot of this is about setting expectations, sitting down with students, as John asked in his question, on the first day of orientation, talking about expectations throughout the term of the program. The point being that if you are waiting into the last term, the last month, to talk about with students about this, it's too late. This needs to be ingrained into the culture and fabric of the institution. Students should have an understanding that they have a responsibility as well. Now, on our website, we have that graduation letter, but we also have a new student letter that you should be putting in your orientation packets, introducing your students to career services as part of orientation, helping your students to understand what career services is there to do. One of the things that I've noted over the years is that schools have tremendous protocols and procedures around admissions, right? They have lead conversions and start rates and all these formulas that they rely upon as part of admissions. We expect the same level of sophistication to be applied to the back end, which is verifying the records that you are providing to your accrediting commission. And as we talked about that release form with respect to Chuck's question, again, keep in mind that we recommend that you have your students sign a release form as part of graduation so that it keeps that a bit more fresh from when the student goes into the field. You should be setting expectations with career services. We've talked about the random in-house audits. I'll tell you the biggest issue that I have seen has been floppiness in record keeping. Records that are unclear, that are handwritten and illegible, that are incomplete, that don't have a clear job title, they don't have clear and legible job responsibilities, and it is not the commission's responsibility to figure out what your records say if they can't even read it. It is your burden to include the verifiable information. And so before these records go out for third party, you should look at it. And I just had this conversation with a school who was in front of the commission at our August meeting. They asked if staff would do a first brush read of their response. and we were happy to do so. And when we looked at it, it was clear that the school had not. And we said to the school, did you look at what you're providing? Because the records you are giving, half of them are blank. So do you know what is going out to your third party? Or do you just say to your career services, send this chart and the backup docs to the third party? You should be taking ownership over this and making sure that your records are putting your best foot forward. We've talked a little bit about batching verifications, again, doing a weekly reach out or a quarterly reach out on an ongoing basis. Set expectations with your employers. Make sure that they understand that this is part of the process. Get feedback from your employers and provide that feedback to the third party so you can set up more robust rules of engagement so we can not annoy the people who are hiring our graduates. Avoid scrubbing data, right? I think employers and graduates get frustrated when you call to try and scrub the data and they tell the third party, well, they just gave that information to someone else this week, and why are they being called again, right? So you should have confidence in the records because you've done your own internal assessments. And then, you know, as the project gets underway, do your best to try and maximize your relationship with the designated third party. You're getting regular feedback and updates. I think, again, a common area is that the records have incorrect emails or wrong telephone numbers. And so if the feedback you are getting from the third party is that you have a lot of invalid emails or wrong numbers, is there any other data you can provide as part of that record to revise the contact information? Talk about the pacing of outreach. You don't want a third party call an employer 3 times a day. I think that's a bit excessive. So make sure that you engage with your third party about the rules of engagement. And so those are some real quick best practices. Again, starting early in the process being the #1 suggestion that we have for schools. Taking a look at your records, making sure they are complete and clear, doing your own internal audits of those records. I think all of these things can go a long way. And so before I jump into the frequently asked questions, I have a couple of questions in the queue here that I'm going to try to answer as best as I can. Many organizations are hiring temps to perm through staffing agencies. Is this considered sustainable employment? Right. I think that the key is that, is it ongoing, and what kind of information are you getting on a regular basis from the staffing agency? Can you show that there are more placements? How many students are being placed through temp agency? Is it ongoing? If it was just a temp gig for 2 days, how many of these gigs have they received? Or is it just a one-time employment? But I would certainly err on the side of caution if it's just a 1 and 2 day temporary employment opportunity. Try to get more information you can from the agency. What about international students? We've been informed that as long as they're able to confirm the job information, it is okay to count them as placed, but please confirm. Well, thank you, Carol. I think that's a great question. Keep in mind, under the graduation and employment chart, one of the categories for unable for employment is an international student who has returned to their country of origin. So a couple of things. If you have a student categorized as unavailable for employment, you need to have the expectation that during the visit, the team is going to want to see the records of those students that you have categorized as unavailable. And if they are truly an international student, they were enrolled on a visa, and they return to their country of origin, it does remove them from the calculation. However, if you have a record to show that they got a job in their home country, in the field, I think it makes more sense to count them as employed. I mean, it is a more accurate picture of institutional success. Yes, they could be pooled, but if they got a job, I think it makes more sense to keep them in the calculation because it is a positive result. So just keep that in mind. On the graduation employment chart, there is a tab which has the glossary of terms. And so if you are ever confused about what is unavailable for employment, again, that is the student was deceased, the student had a medical condition, they were active military service, they were international student or incarcerated. Those are the only 5 categories that would pull a student out of that employment field. So record keeping, again, is the key piece. Do you know if most schools are having records verified in real time or as needed for reporting? That's from Kimberly. Kimberly, what I can tell you is more and more schools are doing this in real time because they're finding that the older the records are, the less success they're having in verifying that information, particularly for self-employed students who are very transient at times and change phone numbers, change addresses, change email accounts. And again, the more stale the data is, the harder it's proving to verify. And so regular ongoing verification, I think, can be a good thing. Keep in mind, there's a budgetary line item that's associated with that. You should have some budgetary support to make that initiative happen. So with regards to advancement in the field, is it against the guidelines for a student to get paid during externship? Well, we don't have any rules in the standards around paid externships, but I know there are state laws and regulations. So we would defer to the state regarding externships or rotations. So if a front desk receptionist enrolls in a medical assistant program as promoted prior to completing an externship, well, is that an ongoing position? Because my understanding is that the externship would be for a limited amount of time. And so if it was ongoing and they got able to advance as an MA based upon their program after the externship was included, I think it would be safe to count them as verified. But if they're just an externship, no. Even if they're gaining money, that is not a sustainable employment. That is a set time frame as part of the educational curriculum. You cannot count a student as graduated unless they completed the externship. So that kind of brings up sustainability questions. When you state that the third-party results include the total number of students in the sample, is this referring to the total number of graduates employed in the field or the total number of students that were selected for verification? It's the total number of students that were selected for verification. I don't know if you can hear Karen feeding me the answers, but she is. So if I don't sound like I'm speaking with clarity on the issue, I'm just waiting for some nodding heads around the table. In this case, the total number of students that were selected for verification. What type of extra information would be required if a high percentage of employment is unverifiable due to companies going out of business, change of phone numbers, companies' refusal to verify due to verification release dates being too old? Well, extra information, I mean, it is what it is, right? And so is there any new contemporaneous information? One of the things that you're able to do is, if these were the results from the July 2015 report date on the G&E chart, and you had a 40% unable to verify rate, well, the old data is what the old data is. So I would go ahead and do a new report as part of the response to say, here are the results from the graduation employment charts that have a March 2016 report date, and you can see some positive trending there. So, I mean, there's only so much a school can do, you know, to work with old data. And so I would look at your policies. Have you changed them? Have you made them more robust? And are they working going forward? What up-to-date information do you have? And if it's just based upon the old report, what data did you have that you relied this data on? So I think you have some flexibility there. How long after graduation should the student be employed to be counted as valid? If it's 6 months after graduation, is that a valid placement? Again, I think there's some flexibility here. It is ongoing and sustainable. So we do not have a hard and fast rule that says 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. We say simply sustainable and ongoing. And so I think there is some flexibility there. Okay. So I have a couple other questions. that are going a bit into the weeds. And so what I'm going to do is I am going to reach out to these folks offline. Here's a good question I think that will benefit everyone. My institution pays me to collect and verify information sent to the third party. You pay the third party to verify, and then sometimes there is a work number. The question is being that this is becoming unreasonable. Well, you know, I don't know if I agree that it is unreasonable. I think that it is a requirement that you maintain verifiable records. I think there is significant investments. Most of the students are getting federal financial aid. I think there's $150 billion in student financial aid being invested in this in higher education, and I think it is it's important that we're able to demonstrate that the records are in fact verifiable. So, is there an administrative burden? Absolutely, and I think that goes hand in hand with the current regulatory environment that we find ourselves operating in. A follow-up question: If are we penalized if the record is verified but different? Not necessarily. I mean, you have the record, and if the record shows that they are employed in the field and it's related to the program objectives, and it was verified but something was different on the record, I believe that is counted in your favor. If it was verified but different for other reasons, I think those are things that the Commission would weigh. But let me be clear on this. The Commission has not treated any of this information in any other way than requesting information. They have not taken any sanction on any institution based upon their verified rates. They're continuing to study these results and get good data from institutions. You know, and so we're looking hard and fast at, one, doing things like this to provide more feedback to schools as they engage an independent third party, talk about best practices, and making sure that that we're fulfilling our obligations as a responsible gatekeeper. Okay, so if you could see my screen, boy, you would be like, holy cow, there are a lot of questions. So let me comb through a couple of different things. We were wondering if there's any way that third-party verification can happen early, around the same time we are doing our own documentation. Students get their first employment. Can we contact them? But third parties often struggle years later to contact the students. Is it possible to get the third-party verification done at the same time or immediately after we have done our verification documentation? That's from Joel. Well, thanks for the note, Joel. We appreciate it. Great question. And absolutely, I would be scratching my head to say, why are you waiting for 6 months to send this to a third party? When you have a good record after the student started, why not subject that to independent verification? 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later. I think that makes the most sense, and I believe you will have better results if you have more real-time verifications. Just make sure that it's after the start date, right? And probably after they collect their first paycheck, so that it checks a couple of those boxes. It is ongoing. They've been there for a few weeks, and they're continuing to work, and they're making money, and it's pretty fresh data. So that sounds like a recipe for success. So gold star for Joel. Great question. All right. And yes, Joel, we are laughing a little bit around the table. So we appreciate your engagement. Did I say that the verification results are due with the SER? I did. Do we need documentation for a student reflected on the G&E chart as a non-graduated student who obtained training-related employment? I think that's a great question, and one that I'm not sure that we have. I'm not sure that we will tackle. We don't believe we need to put that as part of the SER, but whatever record you have on file, I would simply maintain it at this point. For compliance purposes, the benchmark purposes, we are looking for the verifiability of those employment records, but I think that, we're going to give you, Terry, a trophy because that is a really good question that's giving us something to think about. And I'll see if we can put some additional guidance on that on our FAQ going forward. But for now, I would simply focus on your graduates employed in field. Determining income levels, this is very difficult with self-employed graduates. Again, there is nothing in the accreditation standards that require you to report on income levels. We simply want to know that they are making income, right? That they are making some kind of income, that it is a paid position. What do you advise for an employer who operates virtually and does not publish a physical address? Well, they should still have contact information, a phone number, an employer, a point of contact. They should have a web address, an email address. Just because there's not a physical address does not mean that the record should be unverifiable. So hopefully that helps with you. John, a question from Ruth Ann. How do you handle graduates who work part-time for a company unrelated and is self-employed in the field of training? Well, I'm a little confused by that. If it's an unrelated field, then they're not working in the field of training, right? That's the whole point here, Ruth Ann, is that the job must be training related. And so I'm a little confused by the question. So perhaps you and I can talk offline to make sure I'm getting you the guidance that you need. Are we contracting with a third-party verifier to track down graduates when their phone numbers and or email addresses are no longer valid? That's from Sheila. Sheila, that sounds like skip tracing, and that's not what we're requiring you to do. We are simply asking the third party to verify the record you have on file. And so the result may in fact be it was unverifiable. We had a record. We reached out 7 times. We could not reach anyone, and simply at that point, the record is unverifiable. It kind of is what it is at that point. Looking at trending information, and again, if 80% of your records are unverifiable, I think that would trigger some feedback from the commission. But we're really just looking at how well did the school do with respect to the independent verification. If companies have their own third-party vendor for employment verification, from which the original employment verification was obtained, is it necessary to contact the employer again for additional verification? The answer is no. If you have a third-party independent verification of a record, your engaged third party may say, well, we have a unverifiable record because we couldn't gain that from another company. But as part of the on-site evaluation process, you could say, well, look, we have 22% that we're unable to verify, but 19% of those, or 90% of that 22%, were verified by the company's own independent verification entity. So you still have an opportunity to provide information to the team, right? So the team comes in and they say, hey, Chris, we're here looking at records. We saw that you had an unable to verified record of 40%. And I would say, well, that's correct. However, of those 40 records, 35 of them were in fact verified by that employer's independent verification entity. And here are those verified records, and the team summary report would refer to that as part of their analysis. What is the minimum threshold verification percentage from the third-party vendor that ACCSC's required institutions achieve to submit during the reaccreditation cycle? This is not currently included in the ACCSC standards, and that's from Tanya. And Tanya, that's a great question. We do not currently have a minimum threshold. What we have are data that will provide the opportunity to ask some additional questions, which are to say, you had a 75% unable to verify rate. What else can you tell us and give us some additional information about your verification process? We don't have a benchmark. Now, if your question was, what is the expectation for verification? Well, the expectation is 100%, right? And that's what we strive for every single day. Now, is that a reality? Probably not. This is not about perfection. I don't think the commission has the expectation of perfection. Accreditation is in part designed to help schools to improve, and that's what we're doing here. And we're not shooting for the minimum. Again, if you are at 68% employment, are you in compliance with the minimum benchmark? You are. Well, congratulations, you're below average, with the average being 76%. And again, we don't see a lot of mission statements that say we're going to be the most below average, minimally compliant institution you've ever seen. And so keep in mind what the goal should be. My goal is 100% employment and 100% verification, and work back from there. I can feel some collective eye rolling through the phone, yet I am undeterred with the lofty expectations that we have for all of our accredited institutions. Besides a graduate verbally notifying that they are returning to their country of origin, what else can be used to verify? Well, were they enrolled or admitted, or do they have a F1 or J1 visa on file that you can show us that they were participating in post-secondary education as part of a visa program? What if the student is a medical assistant performing licensed vocational nurse programs as a result of the training without the title ever changing to LVN? Well, let me use a different example. What if I enrolled into a 2-year nursing program and am working as a certified nursing assistant, which requires around 250 clock hours? Would the commission have a problem with that? Yes, right? You don't need a 2-year degree program to work as a CNA. And so that's part of the question here, which is, did the student need the education to get the job? And if the program objectives aren't aligned with what the student is doing, I think there can be some questions about the relatedness of the employment based upon the program objectives. How do we verify employment if the company is using work number? Simply maintain that work number file. That will satisfy ACCSC. We are not asking the third party to verify the work number record. So that would be a third party verifying another third party's work, and that just doesn't make sense. And so we would rely upon the record that you get from work number, as long as that record is clear that it is related. And if the record itself is not, do you have a position announcement or any other job titles that show that it is related? Joel says, thanks for the answers, Karen. Thank you for the jab, Joel. Is active duty and deployed the same for reporting purposes? This is the unavailable for graduation or unavailable for employment that pulls that student from the cohort. Yes, Linda, that is the same thing. They would be removed from the report calculation. There are talks about a professional clinic that is run by the school as a stepping stone for permanent employment. I think that brings up some sustainability questions. They've had graduates work in their clinic from 2 months to a couple of years, and I would just be prepared, Richard, to have records that demonstrate that the employment is ongoing and that a stepping stone is not just temporary. And so, Richard, if you want to engage offline specifically about that, we can certainly do that. If a student has a newborn child, can they be considered unavailable? Well, the standard says medical condition, which means a medical practitioner, a doctor, has given you a note that says you are unavailable to work or unavailable to attend school. We don't care what the medical condition is, as long as there is a record from a medical professional that says that. So as long as that new mother, congratulations, new mom, we're real happy for you, very, very exciting stuff, but we need a doctor's note that says because of the medical condition, you are unable to work. Same question from Erica. If they're ill and they can't work, do we have to have documentation, or can we just have the student sign an attestation? Our preference, our hope, our focus will be on third-party verification. You know, and so if there is a high pattern of self-attestations, I think that could trigger some additional questions from the on-site evaluation team. We're constantly looking for pass rate information, and sometimes we don't get documentation from our students. We are constantly checking licensure status to use this data. And Richard, I think that's what I would continue to do, is to document the efforts that you have done to provide some outreach funding. I'm sorry, I said outreach funding because people are telling me how funny Joel is, and we don't think you're funny, Joel. But you know, of course, we think you're funny. So you're adding some humor to this conversation. So Richard, if you have some more questions about the NBLEX certification results, we can talk about that. Here's a good question from Aram. Aram, if a graduate gets a job and is terminated after a few days, but the employment itself is sustainable, can we classify that as employed in this field? Well, this is about patterns, right? So if it was one student who was fired, sure, you can count them. If we're starting to see a pattern of graduates being fired because they don't have the skills they need to maintain the job, then that's something else altogether. So it really depends on how often is that happening. If the university hires its own graduates within their field of study, does that count as placement? Sure, if it's full-time, they're making money, it's related to their program of field, you are now their employer, again, absolutely, I think that would count. Is the school penalized if they continue education? Take a look at the graduation employment chart. There's a line for further education, and again, you would expect that we would have a record request. Why is that person being categorized as further education? You have a letter of acceptance, a letter from the provost, something that tells us that student is in fact further education. What if a graduate is not employed in the field, but the skill set that training provided is applicable to their current position? I don't know if I understand, Ryan. If they're using their skills in the position, is it in the field or isn't it? And so if we want to talk more about that, Ryan, give me a call. Let's see. Okay. There are some pretty interesting questions. Juan Cruz Torres, if you can reach me offline, I think I'll be able to walk you through your scenario. That would be helpful. What if the graduate has severely special needs child and is taking care of that child instead of working? You know, they may in fact be unemployed, but I would encourage you to maintain a record. Again, this is about patterns. We're not holding the school accountable to the average employment rate. We have a benchmark that's around 8 percentage points lower. So there certainly are going to be some situations that your students will be in that keeps them from working. We think the standard has some flexibility there. For that example, I think they would in fact be unemployed. Okay, let me try this. I guess I haven't been clear. All right, so here is what you should expect for when you need to do the third party. If you are accredited by ACCSC, you're going to get an assignment letter that says you have to come to a workshop. You're going to have to submit an application for accreditation. You're going to have to submit an SER. The third party audit must occur at the same time that you submit your SER. And so we're going to have you sign off on the application that you're aware of the requirements. And when you submit that application, you have 6 months to submit your SER, and you should be engaging with the third party as part of that timeline. So this will happen for you as a school when you engage with a third party once every 5 years. Is it accurate to say that third-party verification can be completed by the employer or graduate? Yes, Renee, that is accurate, as long as one or the other does provide the form that gets all the information we're looking for. My sincere thanks to everybody who are saying such nice things on the Q&A. It does, flattery gets you everywhere with me, so I appreciate that. So there are a couple other questions that are really institution specific. And so what I like to ask Elena, Jeffrey, Amy, and Kira is if you could engage with me offline, what I will do is make sure we get you the guidance that you need. So everybody, that's about an hour and a half plus on this important topic. I am really thankful. We had upwards of 500 people register for this webinar, and as I talk to you right now, 335 of you are still paying attention. So that's good. I am going to put the webinar online, so this recording will be online. So hopefully you have a chance to share it with your Career Services Department. The slides will be online as well. And since I do have a captive audience, you know, if you like this presentation and you found it useful, then I hope to see you at our 2015 Professional Development Conference. Just about a month away, September 9th through 11th in Arlington, Virginia. We're working with Skills USA, who's going to be delivering our keynote address. We have an amazing set of pre-conference workshops. We have breakout presentations that are being led up by ACCSU school people. It is an awesome couple of days, and so we're going to have a lot of good information. I really appreciate, we have about 5 or 6 staff members sitting around the table with me today. We are all very thankful of your engagement with us on this important topic. Keep up the good work, everybody. We're really proud of our schools and looking forward to continue to work with them and helping providing quality programs for our students. So thanks again for doing this. We'll have the presentation online in the next couple of days and look forward to talking with everybody soon. So thanks again, everybody.